Okay. Um, and as long as we're talking on the topic, I heard you say you're going away. So are we taking off a few weeks?
No, no, no. I'll be good.
Okay.
Yeah, I have good. I'm in. No problem.
I'll be away in Israel at the end of the month, and I don't think I'll be able to do it from there, but I'll be in touch with you separately.
Okay. Yeah, I'm all in. Speaking of Israel, can you simplify what's going over there, David?
Can I simplify?
Yeah, just for it just seems like it's very confusing right now for me.
Yeah, there's three, possibly three ways of looking at this. Um, One is maybe perhaps the most optimistic, and that depends on when you're standing, where you're standing. The optimistic and maybe the kindest way of looking at it from an Israeli point of view is that both of these assassinations were done now in order to renew what we call in Hebrew koach harta'ah. The I'm sure there's a great term for it in English. Uh,
Superiority.
what is that?
Superiority.
Well, no, it's koach harta'ah is the assume that if you do this to us, it'll hurt so much what we do back to you. So it's in order to reestablish that which was broken on October 7th. That's kind of an optimistic way of looking at this. And a more pessimistic way of looking at this is that Israelis, many are in need of blood, of revenge, of the feeling of revenge. So it's not so noble as the first possibility. And so just get them wherever we can, whenever we can, and do that. The most cynical way of looking at this is, especially with Hania's assassination, is that perhaps some people are not interested in the negotiations for the hostages and the end of the war in Gaza to progress, because everybody knew and knows that this would surely, suspend those negotiations, at least in the meantime. The argument against that would be that there was an opportunity, as perhaps you saw in the New York Times today. This is a bomb that was planted, and I trust the New York Times, as opposed to a missile that was fired, which would have been far more difficult. A bomb that was planted in this apartment months ago, and so the time was right. This was an opportunity to do so. So that's what's going on. We listened to Israeli press all the way back the day that this happened on our drive back from LA, and the very balanced views of the military experts that were being interviewed was not one of joy, of dancing of joy, and it was one of this has long been coming to both of these guys. This is justice has been served, but they were stressing the fact how important it is from a strategic point of view that Israel has this threat. Come on, anybody got the term I'm looking for? I'll look it up.
Deterrence? No.
Thank you, deterrence. Thank you.
Okay.
Deterrent, a plausible deterrent.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing, Rabbi? And I know you're not going to agree with me on this. There's a chance that Israel had absolutely nothing to do with Hania's killing.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case.
I lived with people who killed their leaders every day just because. So yeah, and I'm willing to consider that possibility also. You should too.
Well, I think it's because there's information that's flowing. A huge amount of information flows from Israel that we see, most people don't see. And it comes from verifiable sources of people who are close to the government, of ministers that were asked not to say anything, but let it leak anyway. And briefings and things like that. But, perhaps you're right. But it really doesn't matter, because right now, as far as the negotiations are concerned, whatever the reason is, they're going to be stalled, at least for a while. And the negotiations are not the only thing, of course, but unfortunately, there's something far more sinister from my point of view. My heart doesn't ache for these two guys that were killed. I'm not we can debate whether this is a legitimate way of doing business in the world. I think it's been established that it's certainly acceptable, if not legitimate, certainly by the United States and Israel and other governments. But there has been a situation in Israel over the last few days, same time, of some men, soldiers that were accused of that have been accused of sodomizing at least one Palestinian or Hamas captured Hamas prisoner. I don't know if that news got to everybody. I don't think I saw it in New York Times, but I held off a little the last few days. And a number of members of Knesset, of the parliament, from the ultra right-wing parties, religious right-wing parties, and many from the settler circles stormed the prison, the military prison where these guys were kept. And there was a bit of a riot. So this is Israeli against Israeli, reserve soldiers against regular soldiers, and the police in the middle, in trying to stop justice being done to these people, these perpetrators of horrible things on the Israeli side, the kind of things that people say never happen. The Israelis don't do that kind of stuff. Well, it's rare, but it happens. And then when they were thrown out of one prison, they broke into another prison. This is really disturbing stuff. This is the breakdown of the rule of law. Is
like
it widespread?
like Abu Ghraib during the Iraqi war? It sounds like.
Yeah, except for there were, you didn't have Americans down there trying to break in, did you?
Mm.
To protest. See here, the assault, the brutality is the same, but what's happening here is that's of course horrible, but it's even worse that there's people that are supporting that brutality.
Mm.
And it's one thing to support it from your bed, from your living room, but to be there and to go up against your own people, your own police force, and your own soldiers, that's something that's far-reaching. That's serious. That's a serious erosion of trust. And so, it goes along with the violence done by the police to demonstrators over the last 10 months. Certainly 6 months has been worse. Goes to the fact that the minister of the police is very vocal about his contempt for anybody that would hold a different view. Yeah, it's difficult stuff. So I haven't made things simpler for you, Steve. I think I've made.
Well, David, put on your Isaiah cap, and what's the best case scenario for this time next year? I mean, can you possibly see an outcome that, I don't know, that can normalize these relations so we can, I don't know what to think. It's disturbing.
Yeah, I don't think normalization is in the cards for the next few years.
Mm.
Kind of normal, if we call what we had before had normalization. What we call, by the way, is what Israelis call normalization, was not considered normalization by many Palestinians. So
True.
yes, there are some Palestinians that lived relatively peacefully and are happy with the situation. Maybe, I don't know. But look at the things that I witnessed myself while being in reserve duty in the 90s. And yeah, I was in reserve duty until, I don't remember when. No, was it until the aughts, until I was 42, 60, still 25 years ago. So whenever, yeah. So the late 90s there, 2001 during the Intifada. I guess that's towards the end of my service. Things that I witnessed were certainly not normal from the Palestinian point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But if we were to get back to some sort of non-intense fighting the way there is now, could that happen in a year? Perhaps, if Israel will stop the assault on Gaza and Hamas will be either incapacitated to do so, or look at if I don't know what all the military objectives are in Gaza right now. I have no idea what's left to do. I assume there's plenty, but if those objectives,
Getting the hostages back.
yeah, well, what's happening now, also news out of Israel, is that The units that have been looking for recovering bodies in Gaza are reporting that there's some that there are many who will never be recovered.
What is going on with the conscription of soldiers, the draft of?
Yeah, that's kind of there's a few things going on. One is the most newsworthy part of it, considered newsworthy, are the ultra-Orthodox yeshiva boys that are being drafted, and that's a matter of, I don't know, 5, 6, 7,000. It's not a huge amount, and I think the ones that will be drafted are the ones that probably want to go. The rabbis that are speaking out against it and the members of Knesset, it's more in the principle of things. They don't like being told they have to do, and in some of those circles, if you volunteer, you're ostracized, right? If you do go to the army, you're ostracized by society, by that ultra-Orthodox society. That's kind of a side issue. It's colorful. It's in the headlines, but there's, I think, I don't know where it stands, but there's a law in motion to go back to 3 full years of service. For many years, it's been 2.5 for men for the regular service. There's been a lot of policy changes on how much reserve duty you do because it's a war situation. There's businesses that have gone under because of this. On one, yeah. I mean, and I think, as I mentioned, perhaps I was in touch with an old friend this last visit in May, who's a tax lawyer, and I hadn't realized how much business has stopped at the high levels. Business has stopped with Israel. There's no more new business happening. There hasn't been even before because of the proposed government changes in the judicial system. The ratings, Israel's financial ratings, continue to go down. And that means less long-term business. So while somebody may have an own local business, but the big deals that are being done at the highest corporal level are not happening, at least the way they used to.
And no tourism right now?
There is tourism. There was an interesting article, yeah, by a pretty progressive news source called Jewish Currents. A young woman wrote a piece about war tourism in Israel. War tourism is something that occurs in different places around the world, and in Israel, it has a different spin because of the loyalty and the devotion that so many, mostly American Jews, have to the state of Israel. I just met with a rabbinic colleague of mine the other day for lunch, and he came back from a trip. He took some of his congregants, and when he told me I asked him what the itinerary was, but I made a mistake, as I often do with the word, and I said, what was the agenda? But what I meant with the itinerary. And he says, well, I'll tell you what the agenda was before I'll tell you what the itinerary was, after I corrected myself. And the first thing on his agenda, and I've heard him say this before in other rabbis as well, to spend money. Let's go and we'll spend money there. We'll go to a nice hotel, we'll go to, okay. I don't know if that really has an effect. I mean, if it's done by 1 million people, it has an effect. If it's done by a few thousand, I don't know if that has an effect, but it does have for them. Another one was to bear witness. And the bear witness is a tricky thing because there's a thin line sometimes between bearing witness and voyeurism. And there are a number of these kibbutzim that were decimated that have since barred people visiting. There was a quote in this piece that I wrote by somebody from one of the major Jewish metropolitan federations, who was telling how they had met with members of one of these communities that was hardest hit, after how they were able to get in because they had already decided weeks beforehand that they're allowing no more visitors. And this woman says, well, we just sent them, $750,000. So of course they're going to let us in. That's kind of gossipy. That's cynicism. But there's a tricky thing there. I've seen a lot of Facebook postings and videos that I'm personally ashamed of by my colleagues, who in their minds they're being heroic. In my mind, it's voyeurism. That's how I see it. Bearing witness, as I say, is an understandable thing, tricky thing. I think there's other things that personally I would rather I bear witness to Israeli society as opposed to the horrible things where it happened. I understand. Look at the bearing witness thing. Tourism is something we know from the Holocaust, right? from every Jewish kid going to the camps on one program or another, every Israeli Jewish kid going to the camps, for a concentration camp to visit, not just to Auschwitz, to other places as well, and what that means from an educational point of view. Yeah, so bearing witness. Another one was, to show support, moral support. We're here for you. And the fourth one, I think, his fourth goal in the trip was to volunteer. And he admittedly said the volunteering wasn't terribly serious. They go to a fruit packing plant or something that, it's understaffed, and they help for 2 hours, do something for 2 hours or for 3 hours. And that's nice for the people that do it. Again, they're very heroic. They feel very heroic about it. I don't know what it really does for the economy. Yes, Don.
So, Stephen, in answer to your request for a simple explanation of where things stand, it's very complicated. Very complicated.
Oh, this is interesting. We have it seems well, it's half and half today. I see, looking around. A lot of people are not here today. This, if I can segue back to John, this is a complicated chapter. For me, there's three major parts of this, and I'm certainly not prepared to cram it into a 1 hour session. I don't think we'd be doing justice. Steve, I know you like to keep keep it rolling. But for me, there's the issue of Shabbat and healing. In particular, there's the issue of healing. I would like to talk a little bit about, in depth, what does it mean when Jesus heals? What does it mean when somebody else is involved in healing? And those are the Talmudic passages that I brought today, were that. Well, there's also the issue of healing on Shabbat. But if that at some point kind of becomes a side issue, so there's healing / healing on Shabbat. There's Shabbat. I think this is an opportunity, in the same way we have done Ora Midbar when we studied Matthew a few years ago with one of the churches here in the area. It's an opportunity to talk about something which is a core issue for Jews, Shabbat, and Christians see in a very, very different way. And then there's this seriously deep and wide theological issue of the relationship between God, Jesus and God, and how do we as outsiders understand that, and how does you as insiders feel that, and how your feelings have changed, I would imagine, over the years.
Nice.
So those to me are three major issues that I don't. Yeah.
I would also, I'm very interested in how, for example, most of my Jewish friends are Orthodox, and then how they observe Shabbat versus how a Christian hardly observes anything special or holy day about a Saturday or a Sunday. There's a huge, huge difference in that observance. Perhaps when we talk about it, you could share with us your thoughts on why the difference.
Yeah, that's kind of my intention, Ajit. I think it's worthwhile, not just for Orthodox Jews. Most synagogues in the world, the major part of their activity, as our churches on Sunday morning, is Shabbat. But also, many Jews around the world, not just Orthodox, they have a home observance of Shabbat, of one kind or another. So I think that this is a good framework for us to talk about that. Rita Claire, did you want to say something? No. Okay.
On a slightly different note, and this has nothing to do with but my wife and I will be in Israel November 10th through the 24th.
I'm sorry I won't be there. Then I'll be there afterwards, about 2 weeks later. But we'd love to spend some time with you sometime in Israel and Haifa, and get your perspective there, certainly. And if I can be of help in any way, introducing you to anybody in a particular area, let me know. Yeah. Okay.
I actually lived and served in Haifa. I lived there for 2 years. So.
Oh, wow. And how's your Hebrew?
Outside of Toda, that's it.
Okay. All right, then. Shall we give it a try, the beginning at least?
Yeah.
Yeah. Don, you want to lead us off in the first paragraph?
Sure, thank you. The first, okay. After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool, called in Hebrew Bethzeda, or Bethsaida, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many ill, blind, lame, and paralyzed people. Others add they were waiting for the stirring of the water, for an angel of the Lord went down from time to time into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well from whatever disease that person had. One man was there who had been there ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?" The ill man answered, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." Jesus said to him, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk.
Okay. So just a few contextual items here. We don't know which festival it was. Now we have Jesus is up in the temple for Passover, for Pesach. I don't remember. It's a few times during this gospel as opposed to the other versions. But the fact that he's up there on a festival does not necessarily mean it was part of the festival, which was like Shabbat. So on one foot, Jewish festivals, meaning Passover and Tabernacles, Sukkot, are 7-day festivals. In the diaspora, they're 8 days, not for today, another time, in which the first day and the last day are consecrated days. And Sukkot, instead there's 8 days. It's 7 days and 8, and the 8th day is a consecrated day, meaning that they are like Sabbath. They're not entirely like Sabbath, but they're 80% like Sabbath. There's a few things you can do on a festival on one of those days that you can't do on Sabbath, but then there's the intermediate days. So if, let's say, Pesach begins Wednesday night, that means Thursday. And then, so that day, Thursday, is a semi-Shabbat holiday. Friday, you can't have, you have to eat matzah, you can't have unleavened bread. There are certain things you have to make sure you don't do during the 7 days, but it's a day in which you can do your regular work. And then it's Shabbat, and that's the Shabbat of the intermediate days. And then you have Sunday through the next, through until Wednesday, Sunday and Tuesday are intermediate days in which you can cook and you can carry and you can do stuff. Maybe you didn't go to work, your regular job, but you can do these artists and crafts. And then the last day is like a Sabbath day as well. So that's what makes it a little bit complicated here. Was the festival here on an intermediate day, or was it on one of on the festival, the important part of the festival day? Because it doesn't seem like it's a problem. This particular curing here doesn't seem like this is a problem having to do with Shabbat. Shabbat comes afterwards. So let's just assume it's an intermediate day, and there wasn't a problem with curing somebody, with healing somebody. But so basically it's a story about healing. And you've got this additional text here, which is in later manuscripts, so you can decide yourself whether it's part of the original that fell out and was preserved in other traditions, or was added afterwards. That has an angelic intervention here. The waters stirred there. In other words, the waters are curing waters, but they're really curing only when they're swirling, right? When they're moving around. this attributed to, just 1 second, Don, attributed here to an angel. So you have angelic involvement here possibly, or you have at least a belief in when the water is twirling or is swirling around, that is that's the curing part of it. And then you've got this guy who has no luck because he's in such a situation that even if he was able to move it to get down, he gets pushed out of the way by the other people. So you have a social aspect of this as well, right? The community is not dealing with chesed with this particular individual. Yeah, and the 38 years, probably symbolic of something. I don't know if we will ever know what. Yes, Don.
Yes, and I apologize for my passion and wanting to jump in right away. But I wanted to know whether this pool was maybe part of the Greco-Roman setup there, because the water, from what I've been able to read, was let go from the top of the pool, and that's what new water came in, and that's what caused the stirring of the water, and that this was different from the pool in Siloam, where the man actually bathed in it. This man didn't go in it. He was verbally told to pick up his mat and walk. And I'm wondering if there was some element of purity in his not going into that water in Jesus's eyes.
Steve, you want to?
Yeah, Don, I can't say. I mean, I can't speculate on that. It doesn't.
It doesn't resonate.
No, so Don, my reaction, Don, is that what the narrator wants to tell us is that the people of the time believed that the water was healing when it was
Moving.
busy,
Yeah.
when it was moving. Okay, that's how it was moving. The narrator doesn't tell us. I'm not sure the narrator really what was concerned. By the way, the name of the place that gives us the English Bethesda, which I got a kick out of the first time. I didn't hang out in the East Coast at all when I was growing up, and I was on a fundraising trip once, which went horribly. Was a horrible fundraising trip because of the weather. I missed every meeting. And where did I stay that night? In a hotel in Bethesda. That I got there at 11:30 at night. They didn't have a room for me, even though I had a reservation. Anyway, it worked out all right. They gave me a suite, but it was. So Bethesda. So right away I looked at what Bethesda, Beth place I know, and I looked at it. So Bethesda is from the Aramaic Beit Saida, most probably, and Saida is Saad means help and healing in this way. So that's a place that was known, at least amongst those telling the story, to have these curing powers, like Lord. How do you pronounce it? Lourdes,
Yeah.
in Europe and other places that are in all sorts of cultures around the world. So I don't think this is a pool of purification. This is a pool that was considered, and if anything, the story comes to show it's not the water's the cure, right? It's Jesus who cures. Yes,
didn't FDR used to go somewhere and soak in hot springs for his polio?
that could be because it felt good.
Oh, okay.
We have some great springs out here in Palm Springs. Anybody comes in, there's a relatively new spa that utilizes the ancient hot springs of Palm Springs, which is why there is a tourist spot here that were closed for most of the years we were here and just reopened, and it gets very high grades as far as spas are concerned. There is one person here I know who's been there, and perhaps if they want to, they'll share.
There are some in the little town in Texas called Medina where Steve is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Everywhere after all these rains, all the creeks are full and flowing and very healing. I'll admit. So I think as a Jewish document, this opening, it's just it's crafting a setting for what's about to follow. It's clearly it's Festival of the Jews. He goes up to Jerusalem, the slang or the colloquialism for ascending to the temple area, and then They talk about the Aramaic, the Hebrew. Who is this writing for? Well, it's a Jewish document written for Jewish believers who believe Jesus is their Christ, and yet um, the text that says in parentheses other text add waiting for the stirring of the water, well that's not included on the primary text, but it's clearly in some manuscripts, and it's worth noting here to give that background for what's expected. And then, do you want to be made well? He doesn't really say he does, he just gives an excuse. And so Jesus bypasses that and just says, look, just stand up and walk, pick up your mat, which would be a violation of the Sabbath, which is the next paragraph, right? So he begins to walk, but he doesn't really respond to Jesus. There's no, it's a little understated here, setting us up, I think, for that next paragraph.
Richard?
You know what seems to maybe this is just me, but the way this whole story is set up, that the healing only happens to the first person in the water. Only one. It's like a lottery, or it's a foot race. Whoever gets there first gets the prize, and everybody else is out of luck. It seems really unfair to me. This whole setup. If this
It's
is the way
so true, Richard. And just that assortment of the ill, the blind, the lame. It's just this mass of broken humanity competing against each other to get the prize. Yeah,
to get the prize, and it just makes God makes God look like a schmuck.
Yeah,
I mean,
and so capricious.
But that's exactly the point, Richard. Jesus comes to correct that, faulty situation. No?
no, I don't see that. He's just helping the one guy out. This poor guy who got pushed aside for 38 years. So he's only helping that one guy. He's not writing the situation of where if whoever's going to be healed would be more, based on merit rather than whoever can get to the finish line first.
Yeah. Can I my sense of, and I read this paragraph last night, and my first thought was it's a terribly badly written paragraph in at least in the English. It seemed like a very badly written paragraph. Perhaps it's a poor translation, but it's not very well. I read it 6 or 7 times to try to figure out what was being said, and I'm still not very clear as to what's being said here.
I think the hopelessness of the man comes through. He's been doing this for a long time, and he keeps getting beat out by other people who are faster than he is in terms of getting into the water.
So is it reflecting badly on the people of his time that they're pushing him aside for 30 years?
I would think so, and I think that, to me, takes a lot of the ethics out of the situation, because all these people are self-interested. They don't care about anybody but themselves, and it's a rush to get into the water. And this poor guy has been trying for so many years, and he feels like it's hopeless. And so that's
two ends of the stick. Okay, so why don't we go on to the next paragraph, and then we'll delve a little bit into our next 2 paragraphs, and then we'll look a little. No, well, let's do the next paragraph and see. Go ahead. Sue, you want to read for us? Just unmute.
Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been cured, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat." But he answered them, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Take up your mat and walk.' They asked him, 'Who is the man who said to you, 'Take it up and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had disappeared in the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well.
Maybe, yeah, okay. So let's take it a piece at a time. What are the things that come up in this paragraph? Yes, Rita.
What bothers me is the fact that Jesus chose the Sabbath to do this, knowing full well that it would cause Jewish people to be upset about it and question it. It would seem to me that if he wanted to make points with the Jewish nation, he would have done it not so aggressively, but a little bit at a time to get them used to him instead of hitting them smack in the face with the most important day of the year, the Sabbath.
That's an interesting take, although one could argue on different approaches to revolution, right? If you want to make change in society, there's different approaches. So you are positing a moderate approach, incremental approach. Go ahead.
Would on a Sabbath day, would the Jewish community have been at this pool trying to get cured, or would they say it's Sabbath day and we're staying home, we're not going to the pool? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. To me, it feels like this is where they live. These poor people. This is where they just hang out there. But I don't know, and I don't know to what degree what degree hoi polloi, the masses of people kept the exact rules of Shabbat. After all, there's lots of different kinds of Jews doing different things. This isn't that far from the temple. It's not in the temple, but it's not that far from the temple. So there's got to be some.
I love Rita Claire's comment because it's clear, Rita, that the community that's writing this text in 90 AD, 20 years after the temple had been destroyed, and they're now trying to deal with the fact that the Jewish establishment is now prohibiting Jewish Christians or Christians from synagogue. So it's reflecting on that current situation, but also using the historical setting to root it. And I see this, and David has kind of taught me this about seeing John as midrash on an ongoing Jewish question about the Sabbath and can you do it? And I think David gave us a few extra texts to see that there was an inner question about the role of healing or doing good on these holy days, and obviously men and women are still having babies together on Sabbath. Life is happening. So I just think this was an ongoing controversy, or at least a conversation that Jesus is certainly poking in the eye, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's
Mm-hmm.
definitely trying to use this as an occasion to make a point within the Jewish and the Jewish Christian community, seems to me.
Yeah, my way of looking at this, Rita Claire, is that for me, it's not about what Jesus did or didn't do. It's how someone in the end of the first century chose to frame picture, like Steve says. So
Mm-hmm.
if the issue of Shabbat is the issue, this is one way of dealing with it, and it raises two things. Because one could say, as far as Jesus is concerned, he happened upon this poor man and did something to help, regardless of whether it was Shabbat or not. Not that he said, "Oh, it's Shabbat now. Now I'm going to go out and do this." Right? That's that, and perhaps I'm influenced by the Synoptic Gospels, the stories of walking with the students eating from the grain in the field, because they happened to be walking by. Not that they set out on Shabbat to break Shabbat. They were walking by on Shabbat and they were hungry. So perhaps I'm influenced by that. But what we have here is that I think Jesus happens upon this man and does what he does. Only afterwards it's pointed out, now this was Shabbat, therefore there will be a problem. Those that are looking for problems with Jesus, that's how they're going to bring him down. And we see this all the time. Very often people don't speak to the issue itself. They speak to, they're looking for, the hook. And so that's the hook. But another issue is, yes, Don, and then I'll talk about another important issue that's brought up in this paragraph. Yes, Don.
I was going to say that sickness really is a sign of chaos in people's lives. And here there were words spoken to heal the sickness. And I think back to creation when there was chaos across the land and God spoke and brought order out of that chaos. And I think that's a tight connection for why there were words and what sickness does to the human condition.
That's a very cool point. I like that.
Mhm.
Well, so Sasha is asking from across the room, is this a case of pikuach nefesh, which is you're allowed to break the laws of Shabbat for saving a life? We'll get back to that in a few minutes, Sasha. But there's another issue that's brought up here, which I think often gets unnoticed, and that is, what's the reason that he was ill?
Mm-hmm.
It's his sins that brought upon. This is a pretty important issue here, and and also, so Rita Claire, if I'm looking for things that upset me about this, that is that tendency to go back, not just here, but it's couched in rabbinic literature as well, that if something wrong is happening to you, it's because you're responsible. See what he says at the end? Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, which contradicts other passages that say no. There's not that correlation. God doesn't work that way. But also, I think there's a hint in that first paragraph where the man, he doesn't say I want to be well. He's just kind of stuck, and he's a victim. And for 38 years, and he's complaining, and and then he bypasses all that and just says, pick it up and walk. And so then he sees him later in the temple. I don't know, that this man just doesn't seem to be responding in a way. So maybe what is the sin that he's talking about? That he did something that caused God to punish him? It doesn't feel like that as much to me. It just feels like, come on, man, you gotta you gotta come alive and you can do better than this.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rita Claire and then Ajit.
Something interesting happened a long time ago when my husband got ill, and we were trying to find a good medical insurance, and we had a conversation with a woman to help us to decide this. And when she heard what was wrong, was physically wrong with Ed, she said to him, "Oh," she said, "you must have done something really terrible to deserve this." I will never forget those words.
Yeah.
So awful, huh? But
Yeah.
there are people who do believe this.
True.
Yeah, Ajit.
No, I'm done.
So I let me ask you to turn, before we get to the issue of Shabbat, this issue about what Steve said right now, get up off your feet. This is, get your tuchus in gear. If you could turn to the last page, source number 4. It's a little bit long, but I feel it's worthwhile. I usually don't bring such a long source, and I usually don't spread it out graphically to enable us. This is a great important piece of Talmud, of Talmudic literature in my work over the years, and it's crucial for anybody, it's always I did a lot of training of rabbis in pastoral care, and this is an important piece. So it says this, Rabbi Yochanan's student, and the names here will get it. It's important to keep track of the generations here. Rabbi Yochanan's student, Rabbi Chia bar Arba, fell ill. Rabbi Yochanan, that is his Rebbe, his rabbi, entered to visit him. And he said to him, "Is your suffering dear to you? Chavivin Yisurin, is your suffering dear to you?" Because this whole section in the Talmud talks about how one should accept suffering in a positive way, right? Not to think of it as something evil, but there's a way to think of it as possible that will get you in gear to look in your life what you're doing wrong. Not in the way that Rita Claire told the story right now so much, but in, how are you responsible for your own things? Now, this is a dangerous piece here, right? According to the way we do business today, so often we're trying to convince people it's not their fault, some of the suffering they're doing. But in any case, he says, "Is the suffering dear to you?" Rabbi Chia said to him, "I welcome neither the suffering nor its reward," because people in that time, in the Pharisaic and the rabbinic circles, they believe that when you do suffer, you have a reward in the world to come, in the afterlife. So Rabbi Yochanan said, "Give me your hand." Rabbi Chia bar Abba gave him his hand, and Rabbi Yochanan stood him up. That's the kernel of the short story. It comes into a larger context here, but the short story is basically, how's this working out for, oh, Rabbi, I'm suffering so much. So how's that going for you? How's that working out for you, right? So maybe I'm adding into it, maybe it's time that you just stand up and get up and, take a deep breath and get on with life. But he gives him his hand. It's the hand giving that raises him up. And I always think of these traditions when in the Jesus traditions as well. There's the touchings, not only the words done. This is a combination of words and the giving of a hand, right? The helping hand. So the next, as the Talmud is edited, Talmud is a collection of oral traditions that have been edited together at some point. Here we have Rabbi Yochanan. This is the rabbi. He fell ill, and Rabbi Chanina entered to visit him and said to him, "Is your suffering dear to you?" The same words. Rabbi Yochanan said, "I welcome neither this suffering nor its reward." Rabbi Chanina said to him, "Give me your hand." He gave him his hand, and Rabbi Chanina stood him up. So then the Talmud asks on this story, a little tradition of a story, why? Why is it like this? Couldn't Rabbi Yochanan stand up himself? Rabbi Yochanan is known as the healer in the previous story. Couldn't he have just got up himself? And the answer is, a prisoner cannot free himself from prison. Right? So that's an important thing when it comes to rabbis and clergy members who are constantly giving care to others, and then they're overwhelmed sometimes. That's self-care kind of a thing that wasn't talked about until probably only in the last 20 years that I hear that talk, maybe even the last 15 years, that kind of self-care for people in the clergy. But so that's an important point as well. And you always need somebody else to help you, give you that hand. Then we have let's finish this story, okay? This section. Rabbi Elazar, another one of Rabbi Yochanan's students, once fell ill. Rabbi Yochanan, who we know already is known for his healing, entered to visit him and saw that he was lying in a dark room. Rabbi Yochanan exposed his arm and the light radiating from his flesh. Now, Rabbi Yochanan in other sections is a very beautiful man. Right, so he exposed his arm and light came from it. This sounds very, very Jesus-like as well, right? And he saw Rabbi Elazar was crying. He said to him, "Why are you crying?" And then Rabbi Yochanan, the healer, has this monologue. "If you are weeping because you didn't study Torah as much as you would have liked, well, we have a tradition that says one who does or brings a substantial, there's a problem with this, a lot of typos here. One who brings a substantial contribution and one who does not brings a meager contribution, as long as one directs one's heart to heaven." Basically saying, whatever you did. Don't worry. You'll be judged on who you are, not compare yourself to others. If you're weeping because you lack sustenance, not every person merits to eat off of two tables. one of wealth and one of Torah. That's one of the explanations. In other words, if you're living a life of poverty, not everybody gets to have a lot. If you're crying over children who have died, this is the bone of my 10th son. He shows him, Rabbi Yochanan says, I have this bone of my 10th son. I also have lost people. He said to him, I'm not crying over my misfortune, but rather over this beauty, probably meaning yours, that will decompose in the earth. That's why I'm crying. About you, Rabbi Yochanan, you're going to decompose. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, over this it is certainly appropriate to weep. So they bonded together, the two of them bonded together as equals, cried together, and then Rabbi Yochanan said to him, is your suffering dear to you? Rabbi Elazar said to him, I welcome neither this suffering nor its reward. He said to him, give me your hand. Rabbi Elazar gave him his hand. Rabbi Yochanan stood him up. The importance of this story, the way it's framed in the Talmud, which is the way it's framed, edited is 100 years afterwards, but it's an idea coming from the Jewish tradition, is that there are people that excel in healing. There's rabbis who are known to be wonderful chaplains. There's priests that are known to have, medicinal, powers, whatever it is. But at some point, they too are human beings, and they too are going to die, and they too, everything else. And there has to be a transformation of such. For me, this is a lesson in that Rabbi Yochanan had to learn to be put in his place a little bit, had to be brought down from his pedestal as talking down to the patient, so to speak, brought down in order for him then to come and be instrumental in healing. This is not Jesus. This is different. And maybe it's this kind of thing that where Jesus, in the paragraphs that come, there's a conflation. Conflation is not the same word, but there's
Integration.
clear boundary between Jesus and God. That perhaps is a problem. And this to me is an important, for anybody who's ever had a chaplain come see them in a hospital, this is an important lesson, because chaplains do, I'll talk just about rabbinic chaplains, and I've dealt a lot with training. They do sometimes have a tendency to lift themselves up a little bit too much, because there's a constant dynamic of a looking down. It's physically looking down into a bed. It's, I'm the professional, I'm the healthy, I'm here to help you get better. It's also, by the way, a captive audience, which means that not all rabbis should necessarily be doing this. And it's a very different approach. And to me, this is, it was important, as you can tell, it was important for me to take the time to give this kind of, not as this is right and that's wrong, but to give this a totally different approach than what we're hearing in the story in the gospel. Yes, Ajit, and then others that want to read it.
So if you're reading this from the Talmud and you're basically reading that healing was just a commonplace occurrence in Judea of the time, then the people of the time would not have seen the healings that Jesus was doing as anything special, correct?
Right, yes, they would have understood it. I think at least some would have understood it differently. That I think that, not that this is polemicizing with the Jesus story. That's not what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
But and also this is from a much later period of time.
Okay.
Rita Claire, you wanted to say something before.
I'm also thinking about the other side of the coin. Who is responsible when miraculous things have happened to you? And I'm sure we've all experienced times. Oh, if I had been in such a place, I would have gotten hurt, or what I'm trying to say. There's been miraculous things. I almost call them miraculous things that have happened in my life that I can't explain, and I'm grateful for. But who do you give thanks? Do you give thanks to God? Do you give thanks to faith? I don't know what.
It's another great question, which I think next week we should be able to get into, right? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Raises that question for sure.
Okay.
So yes, Don. Yeah.
Just a couple of things. The epistle of James talks about consider it a joy when all kinds of suffering comes into your life. But the Catholic tradition has taken suffering and elevated it to be participatory in the life of Jesus. Like you make up for the sufferings that are lacked in the sufferings of Jesus. Now that concept has changed in the last. It's a more positive. It's a less, I'll say, bloody kind of connection to Jesus that Catholic Christians are making. But it was there in the 50s. You did have to have your sufferings were equated to the sufferings of Jesus, and if he lacked any, your sufferings would make up for it, what he lacked. I mean, it was just what was fed to us.
Kind of fetishized that
I don't
kind
know
of
how that,
suffering.
yeah, I don't know how that works, what that mystical connection is, but it was hard to swallow when one heard it.
That's what compassion means. So
Well,
participating.
that's true, yes. But that's a different thing than theological connection.
It's a different side of it. Like Rita Claire, there's a side of it that says when you let's say you thank God, I always take that bus. I didn't take the bus that day, or I just drove a minute before the tree fell down, all those kinds of things that happen. One could make a direct correlation and say, that's God watching out for me. Or one instead could just say, you know what, I'm really thankful. It helps me to be a little bit more thankful. Like it helps us be a little bit more compassionate.
It gives a place for angels too.
Yeah.
It does, yeah.
Good
Um,
angels.
An angel that's sitting on your shoulder.
By the way, that's what happened to the Texas governor Abbott. He was jogging in a park and a tree fell down on him. Just
Good to know. Okay, all right.
I would like
Yes.
just for next week, two things. One, I mean, I understand that John 5 in particular has been used in the later councils arguing for the ontological divinity of Jesus, right? That he is God. And yet I think there's a way to read this and hear it as a thoroughly compatible document with the Judaism of the day. And I'd love us to accept that challenge to see if we can see how that could be, where instead of juxtaposing, Christianity supersedes Judaism because we now have God in the flesh, as it were, versus looking at this through the eyes of the Babylonian Talmud that David just gave us. I think there's a universal depth in this story that I just hope we can explore that, so that that emerges between us.
All right, so we'll start with verse 16 next week. So hold on to these sheets. And we'll also look a little bit, because not everybody understands why healing would be a problem on Shabbat. I want to give a little bit of background to that, while perhaps it was and perhaps it wasn't, but what's in the background, it feels like, from those that were using this to campaign against Jesus. Okay, and then but the main part of next week, I think, is really trying to understand that idea of Jesus and God and how what we would. Okay, well, thanks everybody for being here.
Right, peace.
Be well. We'll look forward to a more peaceful week, I hope. Bye-bye.
Safe trip, David.